For 45 years, Shanira Walker had lived in a world where silence was louder than love, where loneliness stayed close like a shadow, and where her life moved forward without ever truly beginning. She was a schoolteacher, stable, polite, disciplined, and unnoticed. Her colleagues rarely spoke to her, not because she was unfriendly, but because she simply didn't know how to talk. Words felt heavy, conversations felt exhausting, and silence felt far safer. Her students respected her but never connected with her. The staff room never heard her laughter, not even once. No close friend had ever walked beside her after school. No man had ever held her hand or whispered her name in affection. At 45, she was still a virgin, not out of fear, but because life had never given her the chance to be anything more than a quiet caretaker. For many years she had taken care of her sick mother, quietly sacrificing her youth, her time, and her own desires. And when her mother finally passed away, the silence in the house became its own kind of ghost, suffocating, thick, haunting. Shanira cried often, but only in the privacy of her room. No one knew, no one asked, no one cared. Her parents had left her plenty of money, enough to live comfortably without worry. But comfort meant nothing when the heart starved. A full refrigerator couldn't replace companionship, and a beautiful house couldn't fill the emptiness in her chest. She lived between home and school like a machine, each day a repetition of the last, and she quietly accepted that this was all life had planned for her. One evening, she noticed that the living room walls had begun to peel. The paint was cracking, small flakes falling like the skin of something aging. For a strange moment, she felt as if the cracks in the paint mirrored the cracks in her own life, silent, unnoticed, slowly spreading. That night she whispered to herself, maybe the house needs color. Maybe she needed color. She didn't want to hire a professional company. They always charged too much, and she never felt comfortable dealing with big groups of people. She wanted someone simple, someone independent, someone who would work with honesty rather than polished words. With a hesitant breath, she opened Facebook and posted an ad. Looking for a painter for my house. Reasonable price. Inbox me. She expected no response. She rarely expected anything. But within an hour, 4 people commented. One of them was an Asian guy with a blurry profile picture. His name appeared as James Alex. His English seemed broken, his clothes simple, his expression kind. His comment was short. I can paint. Good price. Inbox me. Shanira stared at his photo longer than she meant to. Something in his eyes looked honest, not professional, not polished, just honest. She messaged him, and after a few short texts and some bargaining, he agreed to come the next morning to see the house. Her hands trembled slightly when she typed her address. She didn't know why. She didn't know what this feeling was. But something about it felt different, like a small ripple had moved through the still water of her life. The next morning, at 9, she heard a knock at her door. When she opened it, she saw him, a young man, maybe around 30, wearing old jeans and a worn jacket, with paint stains on his shoes and messy hair. His face held a softness that looked shaped by struggle. Hello, madam, I am James, or Alex, you can call. Alex, he said in broken English. She invited him inside, and he followed her quietly through the rooms, observing everything with the careful eyes of someone who was used to working with his hands. After inspecting the house, he nodded. I work alone. Maybe 2 months. All finish. Good work. Clean work. When she asked his price, he told her an amount so low she thought she had misheard. She stared at him, surprised. No painter company or private charged that little. You're charging too little, she said softly. He shook his head. No, madam. Fair price. If you no like work, I take no money. The simple honesty of his statement stunned her. She nodded slowly. All right, you can start tomorrow. He gave a grateful smile and left. The next day, she drove him to the supermarket herself to buy all the paint and tools he needed. He tried to stop her from spending too much, suggesting cheaper brush sets, but she insisted. No, use good brushes. I want the house to look new. He looked at her with genuine appreciation and nodded. They returned home, and he told her he would begin early the next morning. On the first workday, Shanira needed to leave early for school. She surprised herself by handing him the house key. She had never given anyone access to her home like this. "You can lock up when you leave," she said quietly. "Okay," he replied. When she returned in the afternoon, she found him still working, focused so deeply that he didn't notice her enter. He hummed softly as he painted, moving with precision. She watched him for a moment and felt something warm, something she hadn't felt in years. "Your work is very good," she said. Alex jumped slightly, then smiled shyly. "Thank you, madam. I try." He packed up his tools and got ready to leave. When she asked how he would get home, he explained that he walked 20 minutes to the station and took a train to a nearby city. She nodded and wished him a safe journey. But as he walked down the street, a strange emptiness filled her chest again, something she didn't expect to feel. The next morning, before she left for school, she said to him, "There's a coffee machine in the kitchen. If you need coffee, you can use it." His face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, madam." When she returned later that day, she found him painting with focused attention. She stood beside him and began to talk. He responded in imperfect English that somehow felt more sincere than the polished conversations she had avoided her whole life. She found herself laughing a soft, unexpected laugh that surprised even her. That evening, after watching him pack up to leave again, she suddenly said something that even she hadn't planned. "There's a spare room here. If you want, you can stay during the workdays. It will save your time and your money." Alex froze, eyes wide, almost disbelieving. "You sure, madam?" She nodded. "Yes, it's okay." His expression softened into a grateful smile. "Thank you. Thank you very much." That night, she cooked dinner for both of them. They ate quietly at the small kitchen table, each bite somehow warmer than the last. Afterward, they went to their separate rooms, but neither of them slept easily. Shanira lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something stir inside her chest, something she hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Days turned into weeks, and then into a full month. Half of the painting was finished, and half of her loneliness had quietly disappeared. She cooked breakfast for him every morning. He thanked her every time. He fixed small things in the house without being asked. She visited the rooms where he worked just to talk, and he always paused to listen. One afternoon she finally asked, "Do you have your papers?" His expression fell. "No, madam, no papers." "Hard to get. Very hard. But I try." "I want to be legal." Something in his voice touched her deeply, breaking a place inside her that had been closed for years. He wasn't just a painter. He was someone struggling to survive, fighting for a chance in a world that didn't welcome him. And that was when Shanira realized something she had never expected. She was beginning to care for him more than she should, more than she knew how to handle, and more than she had ever cared for anyone in her entire life. The mornings began to feel strangely alive for Shanira. She would wake up earlier than usual, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to hear the soft sounds of Alex moving in the kitchen, preparing his tools, or washing his hands before starting work. Sometimes she caught him standing near the window, drinking the coffee she taught him to make, staring outside with a thoughtful expression. She would watch him silently for a few seconds from the hallway, noticing how calm he looked even when life had given him nothing easy. And every time he turned and saw her, he smiled, a simple, shy smile that warmed the quiet halls of her home in a way furniture or money never could. One morning, as she set a plate of eggs and toast on the table, he stopped before sitting and said, "Madam, you do too much. I can make my own breakfast." She shook her head. "It's all right, Alex. I don't mind." He sat down slowly, his gratitude visible in his eyes. "Back home," he began, "people eat together. Work, problem, life, together. Here I eat alone. But you make me feel like home." The sincerity in his voice hit her like a soft blow. She didn't know how to answer, so she simply sat across from him and watched him eat. Feeling a strange tightness in her throat that she didn't want to name as weeks passed, their conversations grew longer. He told her bits about his life, how he had left his home country with dreams bigger than his suitcase, how he worked small jobs without papers, how he slept in cheap hostels and sometimes in shared rooms with strangers who came and went. He never spoke bitterly. He spoke with quiet acceptance. "Life is hard," he said once, "but I keep walking. If I stop, maybe everything finish." Shanira listened with her heart more than her ears. She realized how small her loneliness felt compared to everything he had endured. And yet, despite everything, he carried a softness that fascinated her. One afternoon, she brought him a glass of cold water while he painted the hallway. As she handed it to him, their fingers touched, just briefly, barely a second, and she felt something electric pass through her chest. She pulled her hand back quickly, hoping he didn't notice, but he did. He paused and looked at her with a quiet curiosity, not bold enough to ask but aware enough to feel that something had changed. She turned away, embarrassed by her own reaction. She was 45, he was 30. There was no place for foolish hopes. Still, her heart betrayed her every time he smiled, every time he thanked her, every time he said her name with his gentle accent. One evening, after dinner, Alex stopped at the kitchen door instead of going to his room. He hesitated before speaking. "Madam, can I ask something?" She looked up from washing dishes. "Of course." He shifted awkwardly, rubbing his neck. You are always alone. No friend? No family?" The question struck her unexpectedly. She turned off the tap and stared at the sink for a long moment. "No," she said softly. "I don't have anyone left." He stepped closer, concern in his eyes. "Why you don't talk to people? You are very kind." She gave a small smile, one filled with a sadness she rarely showed. "Because I never learned how. And now I'm too old to start." Alex shook his head immediately. "No, you are not old. You are a strong woman. Good heart." She felt a heat rise in her cheeks at his honest praise. She didn't believe him, not fully, but the way his voice held sincerity made her want to. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her with real warmth. She dried her hands and turned to face him. "Thank you," she said quietly. He gave a small nod and went to his room, but that night neither of them slept easily. The next day after school, she found him fixing a crack near the window, not part of the job, not something she had asked. "Why are you repairing that?" she asked. He shrugged. "I see problem. I fix." She watched him in silence, wondering how a stranger could care more about her home than people who had known her for years. Without thinking, she said, "You don't have to leave when the job is done." Alex paused, confused. "What you mean?" She realized only then what she had said. Her heart pounded, but she continued, trying to sound calm. "I mean, if you need a place for some time, until you get your papers, you can stay." He stared at her, stunned. His voice came out quiet. "You trust me? This much?" She hesitated before answering, but she knew the truth. "Yes, I do." His eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something vulnerable in him, something that mirrored her own loneliness. "Thank you, madam," he whispered. "I don't know how to say, but you saved me." That night at dinner, they talked more easily than ever before. He told her stories of his childhood playing football on dusty streets, helping his mother cook, dreaming of a life far away. She told him small pieces of her life too, her quiet school days, her mother's illness, her fear that life had left her behind. He listened with a tenderness she wasn't used to. After the meal, when she stood to clear the table, he gently touched her arm. "You are not left behind," he said softly. "You just didn't meet the right people." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked into his eyes and saw sincerity, pure, unpolished, undeniable. It frightened her. It warmed her. It reminded her that she was still alive. The house no longer felt like a lonely shell. It felt like a place where something was quietly growing, something fragile, something hopeful, something she didn't yet understand. And even though there was still a month of work left, she already feared the day the painting would finish, because the thought of losing his presence felt heavier than she wanted to admit. Outside, life continued like always. But inside her home, and inside her heart, something new had begun. Days began to settle into a rhythm so gentle that Shanira sometimes forgot what her life had felt like before Alex arrived. The house was no longer silent. It breathed with movement and warmth. She would hear his footsteps on the wooden floors. Early in the morning, the soft scrape of paintbrushes, or the faint sound of him humming to himself while he worked. It was ordinary, everyday noise, but, to her, it felt like music filling spaces that had been empty for years. One afternoon, rain poured heavily, tapping against the windows like a steady drum. Alex was working in the guest room, sanding the wall before painting it. When the power flickered and went out, the house fell into sudden quiet. Shanira walked down the hall with a flashlight, the beam cutting through the dimness. She found him sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, smiling faintly in the dark. "Electricity go?" he asked. She nodded, handing him the flashlight. "You can rest until it comes back." Instead of taking the flashlight, he shook his head gently. "No, madam. You need it. I'm okay." She insisted, but he refused. They ended up sitting by the window together, listening to the rain. For a long moment, neither spoke. It was strange how silence with him didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Finally, he asked, "You never feel scared alone in this big house?" She thought about it. "I used to. At night, especially. But since you came, I don't feel scared anymore." He smiled at that, looking almost surprised. "I make you feel safe?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Alex. You do." His expression softened with something she couldn't quite name, warm, gentle, maybe even proud. He looked out at the rain again, and his voice lowered. "Some people make home with money. Some people make home with heart. You have heart." His words struck her deeply. She didn't remember the last time anyone had spoken so kindly to her, with no motive, no expectation, just honesty. She wanted to say something back, but the words tangled in her throat. The rain continued to fall, and they stayed there quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. Later that evening, after the power returned, she made tea and brought a cup to him. He accepted it with both hands, grateful. As he took a sip, he winced slightly, noticing a small cut on his palm from working earlier. "You should clean that," she said. Without thinking, she took his hand gently, guiding him to sit at the table while she found a bandage. He watched her quietly, his eyes following her movements as though he wanted to memorize every gesture. When she returned and dabbed antiseptic on the cut, he barely flinched. "You care for me like family," he said softly. "Better than family." "Sometimes." Her hands paused for a moment. The thought felt too meaningful, too intimate, and yet she didn't pull away. "Maybe we're both just people who needed someone," she murmured. He looked at her, then really looked in for the first time she felt her breath catch in her chest. There was something in his eyes she had never seen directed at her before. Respect, warmth, and a gentleness so deep it made her heart ache. A few days later, she walked into the living room and found him fixing a loose cabinet door without her asking. "You don't have to do all that," she said, leaning against the doorway. He turned to her, smiling. "I like helping you. If I can make your life easier, I feel good." There was a quiet sincerity in his voice that made her want to say something she wasn't brave enough to say yet. As he continued working, she realized with a sudden wave of fear that she was becoming attached. Too attached. She told herself it was because he was kind, because he made the house feel alive, because he treated her with a respect she rarely received. But deep inside, she knew it was something more, something that frightened her because she didn't understand it and didn't know what it could become. Alex, however, seemed content in her presence. Every day he grew more comfortable in the house, more relaxed around her, more talkative. When she laughed at one of his stories, he would smile like he had accomplished something important. When she forgot to eat and he reminded her gently, she would feel a warmth that stayed with her for hours. They were slowly weaving a connection neither had planned. But as the work neared its end, she felt a growing tension inside her, something like dread. Every wall he finished, every room he completed, brought them closer to the day he would move on. She tried to ignore it, but each evening she caught herself watching him more closely, memorizing the way he held a brush, the way he laughed, the way he looked at the world with quiet hope despite everything life had taken from him. One evening, as he cleaned his tools, he looked up and said casually, "Only 2 rooms left." Her heart sank, and she forced a smile. "Yes, you're almost done." He didn't notice the sadness in her voice, or maybe he did, but didn't know what to do with it. Something was changing between them. Neither had spoken it out loud. But both could feel it, quietly growing, like a small flame waiting for someone. To acknowledge it, Shanira found herself thinking about Alex more than she expected. Every morning when she left for school, she looked back at the house with a strange heaviness, knowing he was inside, painting, working quietly, filling the silence she had lived with for years. When she returned, she would slow down before opening the door, as if preparing herself for the small spark she felt whenever she heard his footsteps or saw him look up from his work with that gentle, shy smile. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. He was only a worker. A young man trying to survive in a foreign country. Someone who needed a warm place to sleep. But her heart refused to listen. She felt alive again. Something she had forgotten how to feel. Even the students at school noticed she smiled more, talked more, her voice no longer trembling from years of loneliness. One evening, when she returned home, she found Alex sitting on the floor with a paint-splattered cloth beside him. He wasn't working. He looked exhausted. His hands were trembling slightly, as if he had been holding something heavy for too long. When she walked closer, he tried to stand, but his knees weakened for a moment. "What happened?" Shanira asked softly. "Nothing." "Little tired," he replied, brushing it off, though his face looked pale. She made tea for him and placed the cup in his hands. They sat quietly on the freshly painted floor, the smell of paint mixing with the soft warmth of the kitchen light. Alex took a sip, then looked at her with eyes that carried stories he had never told. "You miss your mother?" he asked suddenly. Shanira froze. She hadn't expected that question. "Yes," she whispered, feeling her heart pinch. "Every day." Alex nodded slowly. "I think, you strong woman, very strong." No one had ever said that to her. Not once. In 45 years. She didn't know why the simple words made her chest tighten. As the days passed, the house changed, walls brightened, corners renewed. But something else changed too, something neither of them had planned. Shanira found excuses to be around the room where Alex worked. Sometimes she brought him juice. Sometimes she asked about the color choices. Sometimes she just stood there pretending to check something while secretly listening to his soft humming. As he painted, Alex also changed. At first he was quiet, respectful, careful to keep a distance. But slowly he began opening up. He told her about his home, about the struggles of being undocumented, about sleeping in old rooms shared with 6 men, about working 12 hours a day for little pay. But despite everything, he always smiled, always hopeful. His innocence, his sincerity touched her in a place she once believed was dead. One night, it was raining heavily outside. The sound of droplets hitting the windows filled the house. Shanira knocked on his door softly. "Are you asleep?" she asked. "No, rain." "Too loud," he replied. She smiled and handed him a plate of warm food. "Eat, you've been working too much." When he took the plate, his fingers brushed hers. A small, unexpected spark traveled through her skin. She withdrew her hand quickly, embarrassed, but Alex looked at her with a softness that made her heart beat faster than she liked to admit. "Thank you for everything," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. She nodded and walked away before her emotions betrayed her. But that night, For the first time in many years, she didn't feel alone. She knew the work would soon be complete. And with every passing day, an invisible fear grew inside her. The fear that when the last wall was painted, the last brush washed, her house would return to silence. Alex would leave. And she would return to the same empty life she had lived before he walked into her world. The days passed quietly, but inside Shanira's heart, everything felt louder. Every moment, every glance, every small exchange with Alex. She began waking earlier just to prepare his breakfast before he started work. She placed the plate on the kitchen table, pretending it was simply hospitality, but she knew it was more. She wanted him to feel cared for. She wanted him to feel that this house, even for a little while, was a safe place he belonged to. Alex noticed the small details. How she folded the napkin beside his plate. How she checked the heater in his room twice. How she asked him if he slept well every morning. No one had cared about his well-being for a long time, and her kindness touched him more than he showed. He tried to hide it behind shy smiles and soft thank yous, but inside, something warm began growing. One evening, as he finished painting the hallway, she brought him a cup of coffee. When he took it, his fingers trembled slightly from fatigue. She frowned and gently touched his wrist. "You're working too much," she said quietly. Alex shook his head and insisted he was fine, but she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Without thinking, she made him sit down on a chair and massaged his hands softly, easing the tension in his fingers. He froze, surprised, his breath catching. No one had touched him with such care before. He looked up at her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavier, warmer, as if something unspoken was beginning to take form. Shanira pulled her hands back slowly, realizing what she had done. She stood up quickly and pretended to check the walls, embarrassed. Alex watched her with gentle eyes, understanding what she was feeling without needing words. Later that night, after he had gone to his room, she sat on the sofa and whispered to herself, "What am I doing?" But she knew the answer. She had spent her life alone, quiet, invisible, untouched by affection. For the first time in 45 years, she desired companionship, warmth, and the feeling of being seen. And Alex, with his simplicity and honesty, had awakened a part of her she didn't know still existed. The next morning, Alex hesitated before heading to his work area. He glanced at her as if wanting to say something. She noticed his hesitation and asked if everything was all right. He scratched the back of his neck and spoke in his slow, careful English. "Miss Shanira, when paint finish, I go. But He stopped, searching for the right words. "I don't want to go soon." Her heart thudded painfully. She tried to respond, but the emotion rose so quickly that she had to look away. Alex stepped closer, the uncertainty clear in his eyes. "You good to me," he said softly. "Too good. I feel home here." The words hit her like a gentle wave. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep enough to reach the emptiest corners of her heart. She blinked rapidly, fighting the sting of tears. No one had ever told her she felt like home. For the first time since he entered her life, she allowed herself to truly look at him, his kindness, his youth, his courage, his determination to survive despite everything life had thrown at him. She realized she wasn't imagining their connection. He felt it too. She stepped closer and placed her hand lightly on his arm. "You don't have to leave right away," she whispered. "Stay as long as you need. Even after the painting is done." Alex lowered his head, a soft smile forming, the kind of smile that only appears when hope replaces fear. He nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said. "I stay." That moment changed everything, not just for him but for her, because for the first time in years, Shanira felt something she believed she would never feel again. She felt chosen. The last wall had been painted, and the house looked brighter than it had in decades. Sunlight poured through the windows, reflecting off the fresh, clean colors, filling every corner with warmth. Shanira walked slowly through the rooms, touching the walls as if feeling the transformation not only of her home but of her own life. She realized that the house no longer felt empty. It felt alive. And it wasn't just the paint, it was Alex. He worked quietly in the corner putting away his brushes and rollers. Shanira watched him, her heart tightening with a mix of gratitude and longing. This young man had not only transformed her house but had also transformed her life. The fear of loneliness, the years of isolation, the sadness she carried like a shadow, all of it seemed lighter in his presence. "Alex," she said softly, walking toward him. He looked up, a small, tired smile on his face. "The house. It looks beautiful. You did an amazing job." He shook his head, humility in his gaze. "No, madam. We did it together. You make it possible." She felt warmth rush through her chest. He always knew how to make her feel seen. She took a deep breath. "You can stay here." "Not just for work, Alex. If you want, you can stay as long as you like." His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he looked unsure. Then, slowly, he nodded. I want to. I feel safe. I feel home." Shanira smiled, tears prickling her eyes. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to feel happiness that wasn't quiet or hidden. She didn't feel guilty. She didn't feel lonely. She just felt alive. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. The house was finished, but Alex didn't leave. He stayed, helping her with small repairs, cooking sometimes, and sharing laughter and stories. They would sit together in the evenings, drinking tea, talking about everything and nothing. Shanira no longer dreaded waking up alone. She no longer dreaded silence. One sunny afternoon, while they were arranging the newly painted living room, Alex looked at her shyly. "Miss Shanira, I want to stay. Not only because work finished, but because I like you very much." Her breath caught. She had felt it too, but hearing it aloud made her heart soar. She smiled, her eyes shimmering. "I like you too, Alex. More than I can say." He stepped closer, a small, nervous smile on his face. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. The touch was simple, but it spoke volumes: trust, warmth, and the promise of something new. From that day forward, the house was no longer just a home. It was a place of laughter, of shared meals, of quiet conversations, and of love that grew slowly, but steadily. Shanira, who had spent decades in loneliness, discovered joy in companionship, in trust, and in caring for someone who cared for her in return. Alex, who had wandered through life without papers or certainty, found a home, a safe space, and a woman who believed in him. Together they built more than walls and color. They built a life, a bond, and a happiness that neither had dared to imagine before. Shanira would never be alone again. And for the first time in 45 years, she felt truly, completely alive.